Hey everyone, welcome back to the podcast. I'm Emma, and as always, I'm here with Jake. Today, we're talking about something that sounds simple, but actually has a lot of little decisions inside it. Road trip planning. Jake, I feel like you were born ready for this topic. How are you, and how excited are you to discuss gas stations, maps, and snacks for the next little while?
Emma, I am extremely well and honestly extremely excited. I love road trips. I love planning them, talking about them, and then talking about them again after they're over. I even like the boring parts, which probably says something strange about me. If a trip includes a route, a playlist, and a snack strategy, I'm already happy.
That does sound very on brand for you. You're one of those people who doesn't just make a plan, you build a whole system around the plan. I can imagine spreadsheets, backup routes, weather checks, and maybe a special pen just for writing down hotel names. Please tell me I'm not too far off.
You're really not. I do love a good list. But I think that's because road trips can be amazing when they're planned just enough. Not too much, not too little. If you prepare well, you avoid unnecessary stress, and then you can relax and enjoy the fun parts, like discovering a beautiful view or stopping at a random diner with excellent pie.
And that's exactly why I wanted to do this conversation. A lot of people love the idea of a road trip, but when it comes time to actually plan one, they either overthink it or just throw a bag in the car and hope for the best. So let's start at the beginning. Where did your love of road trips come from?
I think it started in childhood, even though I didn't realize it at the time. My family always traveled by car. We didn't fly much, so every vacation began with a long drive, a cooler in the back seat, and my parents baiting directions. Back then, I mostly asked, "Are we there yet?" But later I started appreciating the rhythm of the road and the freedom of it.
I love that image. And I think that's what makes road trips different from other kinds of travel. You're not just trying to get somewhere. The movement itself becomes part of the experience. People say, it's about the journey, not only the destination. And yes, it's a common phrase, maybe even a cliche, but road trips really prove that idea.
Exactly. On a road trip, the distance isn't just empty time that you have to survive. It can actually become the best part. You're watching the landscape change, you're talking, you're listening to music, you're pulling over for coffee, you're noticing little things. And if something catches your eye, meaning it suddenly looks interesting, you can stop and check it out right away.
That flexibility is such a huge advantage. If you're on a plane or a train, you're following someone else's schedule. But in a car, if you see a fruit stand, a lake, a strange museum, or a sign for homemade ice cream, you can just say, let's pull over. And pull over, for listeners, simply means move the car to the side and stop.
Yes, and those spontaneous moments are often the ones people remember most. I still remember a tiny roadside place I found on a trip years ago. It sold peaches, jam, and pie, and I only stopped because there was a hand-painted sign by the road. That wasn't on any plan, and it ended up being one of my favorite memories from the whole trip.
Okay, so let's get into the planning side, because this is where people can go in two very different directions. Some people want every hour scheduled, and some people think planning ruins the adventure. Where do you stand? Are you team detailed schedule or team just drive and see what happens?
I'm in the middle, and I like to call it structured spontaneity. I know that sounds slightly ridiculous, but it works. I plan the big picture, where I'm starting, where I want to end up, how many days I have, and maybe 2 or 3 important stops. Those become my anchors, the things that hold the trip together. Then I leave room around them.
Structured spontaneity actually makes perfect sense to me. It sounds like you give yourself a framework, like a basic shape, but you don't fill in every single detail. So if you hear about a waterfall or a local festival or some scenic road you didn't know about, you can take a detour without feeling like you've ruined the whole plan.
Exactly. And a detour, as you said, is when you go off your main route for a while. Sometimes that's because of traffic or construction, but on a road trip, a detour can be the fun part. If you overplan, every unexpected change feels like a problem. But if your schedule has some breathing room, a detour can feel like a gift instead.
That's such an important point. I've seen people plan trips so tightly that one delay creates stress for the entire day. If lunch is late, then the museum visit is shorter, then check-in gets rushed, and suddenly everyone is irritated. At that point, the trip starts feeling like a test, and that's the opposite of what a vacation should feel like.
Right, and that's where the word itinerary comes in. An itinerary is your travel schedule, your plan of where you'll be and when. It can be useful, but if it's too rigid, meaning too strict, too difficult to change, it stops being helpful. You want an itinerary that guides you, not one that controls you like a bossy little spreadsheet.
A bossy spreadsheet is a very real thing. So if someone is planning a road trip, what would you say is the first practical step? After deciding they want to go, what should they actually sit down and figure out first?
First, decide what kind of trip you want. Do you want nature, cities, beaches, mountains, food, history, or a mix of everything? Then think about time. If you only have 3 days, that's a very different trip from one where you have 10. Once you know your theme and your time frame, you can build a route that actually makes sense and doesn't exhaust you.
I like that because it starts with intention. You're not just asking, where can I drive? You're asking, what experience do I want to have? And time frame really matters. A common mistake is trying to do too much. People look at a map and think, oh, that doesn't seem far. And then they spend half the trip just sitting in traffic or driving while tired.
Yes, maps can be deceptive. Something can look close and still take hours, especially if you're on small roads, crossing mountains, or driving through busy areas. So once I have my main destination ideas, I start looking at the route in more detail. I usually use Google Maps, sometimes Waze, and occasionally an actual paper map because, I don't know, it makes me feel adventurous and strangely competent.
There is something satisfying about opening a real map on a table. It's old school, but in a charming way. And when you're choosing a route, are you usually looking for the fastest option, or do you prefer roads that are slower but more interesting to drive?
I almost never choose the fastest option for the whole trip. Highways are useful, and sometimes you need them, but they're not usually memorable. I try to balance efficiency with scenery. Scenic means visually beautiful, with views that make you want to keep looking out the window. If I can trade an extra 30 or 40 minutes for a much better drive, I'll usually do it.
That makes sense. And some drives are famous specifically because they're scenic. People don't just use them to get somewhere. The road itself is part of the attraction. Have you done any routes that felt special enough to remember years later? Not because of what was at the end, but because the drive itself was that good.
Definitely. I drove part of Route 66 once, and even though parts of it are quiet now, it still has this legendary feeling. You pass old signs, little towns, vintage diners, stretches of open land. It has personality. I've also done coastal drives where I kept stopping every 20 minutes because the ocean views were too good to ignore. Those are slower trips, but richer somehow.
I love that word, richer. Not richer in money, of course, but richer in experience, fuller somehow. And I think small towns play a huge role in that. Big cities get most of the attention in travel articles, but road trips often shine in the places between the famous places. The towns with one bakery, one gas station, and a surprising amount of character.
Absolutely. Those places can be wonderful, and often they aren't even mentioned in a guidebook. A guidebook is a travel book or app that gives recommendations and information, but it can't always capture the small local charm of a place. Sometimes the best stop is the town you never planned to visit, where you end up talking to a shop owner for 20 minutes about local history.
Okay, let's talk about the car. because road trip planning isn't only about destinations and cute cafes. The vehicle really matters. And I think a lot of people focus on the exciting parts of a trip and forget the practical side. What should people do with their car before they head out on a long drive?
First, get it checked. It sounds obvious, but people skip it all the time. Make sure the tires are in good shape, the oil is fine, the brakes feel right, and the lights all work. If something seems slightly off before the trip, don't ignore it and hope for the best. Hope is not a maintenance strategy. A quick service can save you a lot of trouble later.
That line should be printed on a poster somewhere. Hope is not a maintenance strategy. And I think this advice becomes even more important if you're going somewhere remote. Remote means far away from towns or services. Breaking down in a city is frustrating. Breaking down in the middle of nowhere is a whole different level of stress.
Oh, absolutely. I had a flat tire once on a fairly isolated road, and even that small problem became a big interruption. We had weak phone signal, not much traffic, and very little shade, so we were standing there in the heat trying to sort it out. It wasn't a disaster, but it taught me a lesson. Road trips feel carefree until a practical problem shows up.
And that brings us nicely to packing. Because packing for a road trip is not the same as packing for a flight. You have more flexibility, but you can also end up carrying a lot of random things you don't really need. So what are your must-haves, the things you almost never leave behind?
My core list is pretty consistent. I bring water, snacks, a cooler, a phone charger, a phone mount, sunglasses, and something light to wear if the weather changes. I also always download offline maps. That's one of the smartest things you can do. If your signal disappears, you don't want your navigation disappearing with it. That's not exciting advice, but it's incredibly useful.
Yes, offline maps are such a good tip. People trust their phones so much that they forget how quickly it becomes less helpful without internet. And I like that you mentioned weather. Conditions can change fast, especially if you're crossing different regions. One part of the trip can be sunny and warm, and 3 hours later, you're in rain, wind, or cold mountain air.
Exactly. I also carry a small emergency kit.
Nothing dramatic, just practical items. A flashlight, jumper cables, a first aid kit, a basic tool set, and maybe a blanket. A blanket sounds random until you need one. Maybe someone gets cold. Maybe you stop somewhere windy. Maybe you're stuck waiting longer than expected. It's one of those simple items that can be surprisingly useful.
And then there's entertainment, which matters more than people sometimes admit. A good road trip soundtrack can shape the mood of the whole drive. So what's your approach there? Are you very organized with playlists prepared in advance? Or are you more like, let's just see what we feel like listening to?
A little of both. I usually make 1 or 2 playlists before the trip because I don't want to spend the first hour scrolling through songs. But I also leave space for mood changes. In the morning, I often want upbeat music. Later in the day, I might switch to a podcast or an audiobook. On long drives, variety helps. It keeps the energy fresh.
I'll agree. And podcasts are especially good when you need to stay mentally engaged. Engaged means interested and actively focused. Music is great, but if the road is long and straight, sometimes conversation or storytelling keeps your brain more awake. I notice that if I listen to the right podcast, I actually arrive feeling less tired than I expected.
Same here. I think it's because you're following an idea, not just hearing background sound. It keeps you alert, meaning awake and aware. Of course, you don't want something so intense that it distracts you, but the right audio can make a long drive feel shorter. Sometimes I'll finish a fascinating episode and suddenly realize I've covered 100 kilometers without feeling bored.
Let's move into budgeting, because road trips have this reputation for being cheap, and they can be, but they can also become expensive in sneaky ways. Sneaky here means not obvious at first. You think, we're just driving, and then suddenly you've paid for gas, parking, toll roads, snacks, and a last-minute hotel. what should people budget for?
The big categories are fuel, accommodation, food, and activities. Then there are the smaller costs people forget. Tolls, parking, coffee stops, and entrance fees for parks or museums. Fuel is often the hardest one to estimate because prices vary, and your car's fuel efficiency matters too. Fuel efficiency simply means how far your car can go using a certain amount of fuel.
And that's where people need to factor things in. Factor in means include something in your thinking or calculation. If you're driving a larger vehicle or carrying a lot of weight or using air conditioning the whole time, your fuel use may be higher than usual. So, how do you estimate fuel cost without getting too technical?
I keep it simple. I estimate the total distance, then check my car's average fuel use per 100 kilometers, or per mile if that's the system I'm using. Then I look at average fuel prices in the areas I'm traveling through. That gives me a ballpark figure, meaning a rough estimate. It won't be exact, but it's usually close enough to help me plan responsibly.
That's a practical way to do it. And accommodation is probably the second big money decision. Some people book every night in advance, and some people decide each evening where they'll sleep. I can see advantages to both. One gives you peace of mind, and the other gives you freedom. How do you usually handle it?
If it's a busy season or a famous route, I book at least some nights ahead, especially the first and last night. But in between, I sometimes stay flexible. As for style, there are options. Hotels, motels, guest houses, short-term rentals, campgrounds, and for the brave, or very budget-conscious, sleeping in the car. I have done that exactly once, and my back still remembers it.
I was going to ask whether it felt adventurous or just uncomfortable. Maybe both? I think that kind of thing sounds fun in theory when you're younger, especially if you're trying to save money. But after a certain age, a mattress starts to sound like one of life's greatest inventions.
That is very true. At the time, I had a hatchback. The seats folded down and enough energy to believe it was a great idea. It wasn't terrible, but it definitely wasn't luxurious. That said, campgrounds can be an excellent middle ground. They tend to be affordable, and many have bathrooms, showers, and really beautiful surroundings. So you're saving money without feeling miserable.
And waking up in a beautiful natural setting can feel like a kind of luxury too, just a different kind. Instead of expensive pillows and room service, you get fresh air, trees, maybe a lake nearby, and a quiet morning. That sounds appealing to me. As long as the weather cooperates and there aren't too many mosquitoes. That's my one tiny condition.
Now, fair condition. Mosquitoes can absolutely ruin the romance of nature. Now, food is another area where road trips can go well or badly. If you're not careful, every meal turns into fast food and sugar. That's convenient, but after 2 days, you start to feel terrible. I always try to pack some decent food first so I don't make hungry decisions at the worst moment.
Hungry decisions are dangerous. It's true, though. If you're starving, you'll buy the first thing you see, and that might be a huge bag of chips and a sad sandwich. So what do you pack? What actually works in a car without becoming a mess?
I usually pack fruit that travels well, like apples or grapes, plus nuts, crackers, cheese, maybe sandwiches for day one, and lots of water. A cooler helps a lot. Then I save restaurant stops for when I can really enjoy them. If I'm stopping to eat out, I want something local or memorable, not just the same chain meal I could get anywhere.
Yes, that's such a good philosophy. The first day is perfect for food from home because it feels easy and comforting, and after that, local restaurants become part of the adventure. I remember doing a trip where we kept asking, "What's this area known for?" And that simple question led us to some great meals we never would have found otherwise.
That's the right approach. Every region has a few specialties, and trying them gives you a stronger sense of place. On one trip, I became slightly obsessed with comparing barbecue in different towns. And if listeners don't know, barbecue is often shortened to BBQ. People can become very passionate about it. In some places, discussing sauces is almost like discussing politics.
That is absolutely true. Food debates get serious fast, but they're fun and they create stories. Okay, let's talk about another road trip reality. The people you're traveling with. Even people who are great friends in normal life may not be great travel companions. Being in a car together for hours can reveal a lot about personality.
It really can. My biggest advice is to figure out whether you're compatible travelers before the trip. Compatible means your habits and preferences work well together. If one person loves early mornings, strict plans, and budget motels, while the other wants slow starts, spontaneous changes, and boutique hotels, there may be tension by day 2.
And sometimes the tension doesn't come from one big problem. It comes from lots of little differences that build up. One person wants more coffee stops. One person hates silence and always wants music. One person gets carsick on winding roads. None of those things is dramatic alone, but together they can become, as people say, a recipe for conflict.
Exactly. Or a recipe for disaster, if you want the stronger version. That phrase means the conditions are perfect for something bad to happen. Budget differences are especially important. If one person is trying to save every dollar and another wants expensive meals and nicer rooms, resentment can build. Resentment is that bitter feeling when something starts to feel unfair.
So really, the smart thing is to talk about expectations before the trip. Not in a heavy, serious way, but honestly. How much do we want to spend? How many hours do we want to drive in a day? Do we want early starts or relaxed mornings? Are we planners or improvisers? Those questions can prevent so many awkward moments later.
Yes, and I would add one more question. How much alone time do people need? That might sound strange on a shared trip, but it's important. Even good friends can get tired of constant conversation and constant company. Sometimes someone just needs 20 quiet minutes, headphones on, looking out the window, trying to decompress after a long stretch of driving.
Decompress is such a useful word. It means to relax and release stress after pressure or activity. And I think that matters on trips more than people realize. Vacations are supposed to be fun, but they can still be tiring. New places, long days, constant decisions, it adds up. So giving each other a little space can actually make the group stronger.
Completely. Another helpful thing is sharing responsibilities. One person can drive first, another can navigate, another can keep track of spending or look up possible stops. When people feel included, the trip feels more like teamwork and less like one exhausted person carrying everyone else. Divide and conquer works here. That phrase means splitting tasks to make them easier.
I love that. And teamwork also makes the boring parts feel lighter. All right, speaking of keeping the mood good, what about road trip games or little activities in the car? Not every drive is beautiful and dramatic. Sometimes it's just a long road and a lot of sky. How do you keep things fun without getting annoying?
There are some classics that still work. The license plate game is simple and surprisingly addictive. 20 questions can be great if people are in the mood. Would you rather often leads to unexpected conversations. Trivia is fun too, especially if people have different interests. And of course, shared audiobooks can be fantastic because they give everyone one story to react to.
Would you rather really does reveal a lot about people. You ask something silly and suddenly you're having a real conversation. Like, would you rather have a perfect scenic route with terrible weather or boring roads with perfect sunshine? It starts as a game, but then you learn what matters to someone. Comfort, beauty, efficiency, mood, all of it.
That's true. And some of those questions become weirdly difficult. For example, would I rather have amazing snacks and bad music? Or amazing music and terrible snacks? I want to say music matters more, but then I remember being hungry in a car, and suddenly that answer feels less certain. Maybe the real answer is never let either category fail.
That's probably the wisest answer. Okay, let's shift a little and talk about safety, because I never want a road trip conversation to sound carefree in a careless way. There are real risks on the road, and it helps to think about them ahead of time. What are your basic safety habits for a long drive?
First, I tell someone where I'm going and when I expect to arrive, especially if I'm driving alone or heading into quieter areas. I also make sure my phone is charged and that I have a car charger. I don't wait until the battery gets low. And I try to keep water in the car at all times, not just for comfort, but as basic preparation.
That check-in idea is especially important for solo travelers. And it's not about being paranoid. Paranoid means unreasonably fearful or suspicious. This is just smart. If plans change, send a quick message. If you're going to be late, let someone know. It takes 1 minute, and it means someone else has a rough idea of where you are.
Exactly. I also pay attention to fatigue. Drowsy driving is genuinely dangerous, and people often underestimate it because they think, I'm not drunk, so I'm fine. But if you're very sleepy, your reactions get slower, your focus drops, and you start making poor decisions. If I feel tired, I stop. Coffee helps, but sometimes what you really need is a proper break.
Yes, and there can be pressure on a trip to make good time. That's a useful expression. It means covering distance efficiently and staying on schedule. But if making good time means you're pushing through when you're exhausted, then it's not worth it. Arriving an hour later is much better than arriving stressed, unsafe, or not arriving at all.
Couldn't agree more. And weather matters too. Rain, fog, snow, even strong wind can change a road trip quickly. So I check forecasts, but I also stay flexible. If the weather turns bad, I slow down or change the plan. That's another advantage of not making your itinerary too rigid. Flexibility is not just fun, sometimes it's the safer option.
Let's talk about one of the best parts now: scenic stops and hidden gems. I feel like every memorable road trip has at least one place you weren't really expecting, and somehow that becomes the story you tell everyone afterward. Do you actively try to find those places, or do you trust luck and wait for them to appear?
A little of both. I look up a few interesting stops in advance, but I also leave space for accidental discoveries. And one of the best ways to find them is through word of mouth, meaning information passed from one person to another in conversation. Ask locals, ask someone at a cafe, ask the person selling fruit by the road. People often know the best spots.
And those recommendations tend to lead you to non-touristy places, which I think many travelers want. Non-touristy means not packed with visitors, not designed mainly for outsiders. Sometimes a place is famous for good reason, of course, but there is a different kind of pleasure in finding somewhere quiet that still feels authentic and connected to local life.
Definitely. Some of my favorite stops were barely marked. On one trip through the Southwest, we saw a handmade sign that pointed toward canyon views. That was it, just a simple sign. We turned off the main road, drove a couple of miles, and found this incredible overlook with almost nobody there. It felt like we had discovered something private, even though obviously we hadn't.
That sounds amazing. An overlook, for listeners, means a high place where you can stand and look out over a landscape. It's one of those travel words that comes up a lot. Also, breathtaking is the perfect word for a view like that. So beautiful or impressive that it almost takes your breath away. I love moments like that.
Me too. And the funny thing is, we almost skipped it because we were trying to stay on schedule. That's why I keep saying the best road trips breathe a little. If every minute is assigned, you miss what makes road travel special. Sometimes the magic is literally sitting by the side of a road you never planned to take, eating a snack and staring at a huge view.
That brings up another modern road trip issue: photography and social media. People want to capture moments, which is understandable, but there can also be pressure to document everything. Suddenly you're not just taking a photo for yourself, you're producing content. How do you balance wanting memories with wanting to actually live the trip while it's happening?
My rule is simple. Take some photos, then put the phone away. capture the memory, but don't turn the moment into a project. If I spend 10 minutes getting the perfect shot, I've often missed the feeling of the place. And sometimes the feeling matters more than the image. A photo can remind you of a moment, but it can't replace fully experiencing it.
That's such a good way to put it. We hear the phrase be present a lot, and sometimes it sounds vague, but it's actually very practical. It means giving your attention to what's happening right now, instead of splitting it between reality and your screen. On a road trip, that might mean simply watching the light change, listening, and letting the place sink in.
Yes, and some of my strongest memories are from moments I never photographed at all. Maybe the light was changing too fast, or maybe I was too absorbed in the moment to reach for my phone. Absorbed means completely involved or focused. Those memories still stay with me, not because I documented them perfectly, but because I actually paid attention when they happened.
I like that a lot. Though I will admit I am still the person who sometimes says, wait, just one more photo. But maybe that's okay if you don't let it take over. All right, let's do a quick rapid fire section before we wrap up. Short answers, no long thinking, just your first instinct. Are you ready?
I am ready, although I suspect I may fail at the short answers part because road trips bring out a lot of opinions in me. But go ahead, I'll do my best to stay disciplined, or at least mostly disciplined.
Highway or back roads?
Back roads. Slower, yes, but usually more interesting, with better scenery and more chances to find small local places.
Music or podcast?
Music early in the day. Podcast later. Morning feels like motion. Afternoon feels like conversation.
Window down or air conditioning?
Window down when the weather is nice. That feeling of warm air and road noise is part of the classic road trip mood.
That was poetic. Snacks from home or gas station snacks?
Both. And I refuse to choose. Home snacks keep me sensible. Gas station snacks keep the trip fun and slightly chaotic.
And last one, plan every stop or go with the flow?
Go with the flow, but with a safety net. Know the basics, then let the middle of the trip surprise you.
Perfect. I think that sums up your whole philosophy, actually. So, if someone listening has never planned a road trip before and feels a little unsure, what's the one piece of advice you would want them to remember after today's conversation?
Honestly, just start. Don't wait until you know everything. Pick a direction, choose a few meaningful stops, check your car, pack some snacks, and go. Your first trip doesn't need to be perfect to be worth doing. In fact, part of the joy is learning what kind of traveler you are while you're already on the road.
I love that because it takes away some pressure. People often think they need the perfect route, the perfect budget, the perfect travel partner, the perfect weather. But if you wait for every detail to line up perfectly, you might never leave. And some of the best memories come from imperfect moments anyway, don't they?
They really do. Flat tires, wrong turns, rainy afternoons, strange motels, overcooked diner eggs. Somehow, those become the stories you laugh about later. At the time, they may be annoying, but afterward, they give the trip texture. Texture here means character and detail. The things that make an experience feel real and memorable, rather than smooth and forgettable.
That's such a nice way to describe it. And yes, the weird details become the legends. All right, before we close, I want to ask one final broader question. What is it, in your opinion, that road trips offer people that other kinds of travel don't quite offer in the same way?
For me, it's the sense that you're seeing a place gradually and on your own terms. That phrase means in the way you choose, according to your preferences. You notice transitions, city to suburb, suburb to farmland, farmland to forest. You feel distance differently. And because you can stop, change course, and react to what's around you, the experience feels more personal.
That's beautifully said. And I think there's another layer here for language learners, too. If you're traveling in an English-speaking place, a road trip gives you so many natural chances to practice. Reading signs, asking for directions, ordering food, chatting with locals, understanding accents, dealing with little surprises. It's learning through real life rather than through exercises on a page.
Absolutely. It's a kind of total immersion, meaning you're surrounded by the language in a real environment. And because you're moving through different places, you may hear different vocabulary, different speaking styles, even different rhythms in how people talk. It can be challenging, but in a good way. You're not memorizing language. You're using it for an actual purpose.
And that's a perfect reminder that travel and learning can support each other so naturally. You get adventure, you get practice, and you get stories. 2 birds with 1 stone, as the idiom goes. That idiom means achieving 2 things with 1 action. In this case, maybe even 3 or 4 things, if we're being generous.
I was going to say, that's a very efficient stone. But yes, exactly. A road trip can be a vacation, a learning experience, and a confidence builder all at once. It teaches you how to adapt, how to make decisions, and how to enjoy the process instead of only focusing on arrival.
Well, that feels like the perfect place to end. Thank you, Jake, for bringing your lists, your snack wisdom, and your suspiciously strong opinions about routes and gas station food. And thank you to everyone listening. I hope this conversation gave you useful vocabulary, practical ideas, and maybe a little motivation to start planning your own road trip soon.
And if you do, remember the basics. Check the car, download the maps, bring water, and leave a little room for surprise. The best parts of a road trip are often the ones you couldn't have planned anyway.
Exactly. Thanks again for being here, everyone. Take care of yourselves, travel safely, and if the road leads you somewhere unexpected and wonderful, I hope you say yes to it. We'll see you next time.
Happy travels, everyone!